Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. So today, you can continue to see the Robotyne salient that has been created by Ukrainian forces, or possibly allowed to have been created by Russian forces. Ultimately, history will decide on that fact. We continue to see Ukrainian forces attempting to expand this salient in this area here, both to the east and west. Again, the viability for the Ukrainians to continue to push deeper in a southern route would be very, very difficult in the fact that the Russians would then attack the Ukrainians on these east and western flanks. So it is in the Ukrainians' best interest to expand this salient or pocket, again, east and west. And right now they're having significant trouble doing so. As I had reported the day before yesterday, Ukrainian forces are continuing to push towards Verbova, this area here. And we'll go over to the other map, and you, the viewer, can see the terrain. This one just works out a bit better. So again, this is the pocket in question, and you can see here the way in which the Ukrainians are attacking. Again, east, and to a lesser extent in the west here. But as we are speaking, the Russians continue to pound Ukrainian forces as they attempt to press towards Verbova. So it is very slow going, with Russian glide bombs, Russian Lancet drones, Russian artillery, Russian anti-tank guided weapons teams continuing to hit the Ukrainians in this area as they try to I don't want to say break out of this pocket, but expand the pocket where they can continue operations south. Now, the question is are they going to look to expand the pocket much more in an easterly direction before continuing south? Unsure at this point. Obviously, the Ukrainian state, the leadership, functionaries in Kiev would like to see the Ukrainian military at least take Bakhmut. This would be and is an important objective for the Ukrainian military. Now, again, the Ukrainian military fully understands that doing a drive straight south to Bakhmut without widening this pocket would be suicide for those Ukrainian brigades. And if we look at the Ukrainian units involved, we're seeing between 4 to 7 Ukrainian brigades that are dedicated to this pocket. Obviously, this is not everything that the Ukrainians have in this area, but this is what the map site is reporting, and this is what we have the ability to show you at this point. In other news, the Ukrainians have also started offensive operations in another area as well, and that's near the Donetsk airport. If we go over to the city of Donetsk, in this area, the fighting that is taking place is taking place near this small village of Robotyne. And I probably said that incorrectly, and I apologize, and I'm sure someone will correct me. Now, are the Ukrainians attempting to seize control of the Donetsk airport that is just to the northwest of Donetsk? And let's go over to, again, back to the Rondelli Foundation map and have a look at this. And this will give us a better idea what the Ukrainians are trying to do. Probably not so much seizing control of the airport. The airport, for all intents and purposes, is useless. It is not being actively used by any side. It's not being used by the Russians. It's not being used by the Russian Novorossiyan forces. That is not happening. It is essentially one vast kill zone. So if you see the line of contact get pushed south towards the airport, again, it doesn't mean too much. What you really want to watch is if the Ukrainians are able to get into the outskirts, the northern outskirts of Donetsk. Are they able to push past these retention ponds and these small lakes on the northern part of the city? And right now, we don't think this is a concerted effort coming out of Avdiivka by Ukrainian forces with the intent of regaining the Donetsk airport or pushing into the northern encroaches of Donetsk city as well. We think this is a probing attack being conducted by isolated units of the Ukrainian military. Again, more so in reference to shape a political narrative. Hey, the Ukrainians are launching another offensive in this area and pushing the Russians back. But ultimately, it's going to be very difficult for the Ukrainians to make any sort of headway in this area, given the amount of forces and then the closeness to Donetsk city, in which the Ukrainian forces would have to be operating. Again, this is a very large city and the hub of quite a bit of Russian military power in this area as well. So very, very difficult for the Ukrainians to, again, take territory to the south of Avdiivka. Again, we believe these are probing attacks. If we go to the military land and we try to look at military units involved near Avdiivka, and essentially you have a reinforced Ukrainian brigade that is operating near Avdiivka. You have the 53rd Mechanized Brigade. In addition, you have elements of the 70th Separate Infantry Battalion. Now, I'm not sure if that's part of the 53rd Brigade or not. And then finally, you have the Special Police Forces of the Ukrainian National Guard, which are also operating, and on the it would be the to the left or to the western side of Avdiivka. You have the 142nd Reserve Rifle Brigade in this area as well. Now, is it possible that the Ukrainians brought additional elements down to conduct operations in this area? Possibly, but again, they're facing off against elements of the 10th Tank Regiment, the 9th Marine Regiment, and Novorossiya forces of the 1st Motorized Rifle Brigade, Slavyansk DNR. And that's kind of where things set right now. Further to the north, again, fighting is continuing, but we are not seeing any sort of concerted push towards Bakhmut. The Russians now are starting to set up entrenched defensive lines in and around Bakhmut, which is going to make it even more difficult for Ukrainian forces to enter and retake control of Bakhmut. There are significant amounts of forces in terms of the Ukrainian force construct to the west of Bakhmut, but at this point, and let's go over to the deep state, because this will tell you, it will give you a better look at what exists in terms of Russian forces as well. And if you see here, you have reserve units, you have elements of the 106th Airborne Division, 98th Airborne Division, so high-quality Russian units that are currently in Bakhmut being reinforced with mobilized reserve forces of the Russian Federation as well. So again, the long-term prognosis for this conflict is as follows. As I've talked about in other videos, the Russians are continuing to mobilize. Right now, we are essentially going to see within the next 4 months, the Russians will start to mobilize the equivalency of one combat division every month. So in about 4 months, the Russians will have online one combat division, one extra combat division every month thereafter. 6 months from that date, okay, so now we're looking 10 months from now. Every month, the Russians will be deploying 2 combat divisions per month. And we're hearing this talk that the Russians are preparing for a 3-year war. So then if you fast forward 2 years, 1.5 years to 2 years from our current position, the Russian army is going to be monolithic. It is going to be massive in size and scope, and at the same time, we are going to see that ability of the Russian forces to expand continue. So at a certain point, we could see the Russians fielding 3 divisions per month. And it's happening. The Russians are mobilizing. Is it a general mobilization where all adult males are being pressed into service? No, that's not what's happening. But we are seeing very large-scale recruiting efforts by the Russians continue, both to induct volunteers and at the same time in contract forces, but at the same time conscripted forces as well. So both of these are working in conjunction to expand the Russian military. And we know the Russian military plans to hit that 1.5 million men. Now, that's not just the ground forces. That's all-encompassing. The ground forces will probably be in that million personnel, if not much larger, within the next, again, 1.5 to 2 years, given the amount of money that is being, again, the Russian defense budget now surpasses 80, quite possibly $100 billion. Again, at the onset of this conflict, the Russian defense budget was around $60 billion. So expanding quite a bit. Now, if you compare and contrast that with what the United States is handing over to the Ukrainians, already almost $140 billion. You know, and just on a side note, what really angers me is Maui, Lahaina. Joe Biden gave each resident of Lahaina $750. $750. It's the highest cost of living anywhere in the United States. And they gave them $750. It is estimated that to rebuild Lahaina exactly the way it was prior to the fire, prior to the wildfire, that cost would be between $2 and $5 billion. $2 and $5 billion. And how much have we given to the Ukrainians? This black hole that is never going to stop. Because again, as I've talked about before, no matter where you sit on whatever side of this conflict, the Russians are not going to allow Ukraine to become aligned with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They're not going to allow it. And as this war continues to escalate, as we see drone strikes take place against Moscow, Rostov, and other places within the Russian Federation, this conflict's going to escalate. And again, I talked about the possible deployment of tactical nuclear weapons, and at this point, I still think that's a possibility, depending on where this conflict goes and how it goes. But at the end of the day, the Russians are not going to allow Ukraine and this current government that is in Kiev to remain in existence in perpetuity. They're not going to do it. And you have to look at history. And you have to look at how fickle the American political system can be. One day, everyone, at least in terms of the perception here in the United States, supports Ukraine. The next day, it's going to look a lot different. And I feel as we continue to probe the interactions with Hunter Biden and his relationship with Ukraine, more and more information is going to come to light. And eventually, the American people are going to tire of this conflict, and they are not going to want to continue to contribute billions and billions and billions of dollars every month. Into what? And what is the end game? Because I guarantee you, the end game for the Russians, it is much more important for them in terms of geopolitics and their perceived defensive safety. Not so much for the United States. So again, we will continue to monitor. We will continue to report. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.